Well, when we sit down, it's time for the conversation, and tonight we're bringing in a unique voice into this conversation. Remember, we said Debrief is all about bringing fresh perspective and unique voices into the conversation. And tonight, joining us to have this conversation is Dr. Abel Kenyoru, who is an economist. Now, his track record speaks for itself. He was the chief economist for the government of Kenya during the reign of President Mwai Kibaki. He is also the former deputy ambassador to the United Kingdom. Further, he has lectured at the United States International University. He is also an author, and the title of his book is Kenya's Foreign Service and Export Trade Promotion. And last but not least, he holds a PhD in international trade from Washington International University. Well, there you have it. Such a track record, and it speaks for itself. Dr. Kenyoru, thank you for making time.
Welcome.
We are very honored, and it's interesting because you served as the chief economist during a regime or a reign where it's been said to be the best economic time that Kenya ever went through. And now we've transitioned into another presidency, and times are not really good. Very briefly, let's just... What's the discord? Why was it that during that time when you served as chief government economist, things were really good, and now Kenyans are saying things are not so good?
Thank you, Ondiro. During Kibaki's time, when I worked as a chief economist, the 2 terms, I think I would say that he had inherited a very difficult economic status in Kenya. We had had negative growth during Moi's time.
Okay.
But I think when he came in with his government, he had in the back of his mind, and during his campaign for presidency, he was to revive Kenya's economy.
Then what's the discord? Why was he able to revive and now we are not able to keep up?
He was more focused. He's an economist himself, that you have to take it, a very experienced economist. He has been a minister for finance and planning for many years. And he was very consistent in terms of doing what he had already professed to do. And he gave the bureaucrats, his officers, professionals, and ministers to implement his policies without any interference.
Well, speaking of change, now we are seeing President Uhuru Kenyatta took office, and he has had quite a turbulent era. And on the 14th, he gave a very impactful, or rather big talk, whichever way you want to look at it, speech at Mombasa, and some things came up. And one of the things that stood out during that speech was the fact that Kenyans live, eat, and breathe politics. And he was saying we must tailor our politics to go in the direction of development. However, even before we get to that, I'd like to understand from where you sit, you're well-traveled, you are well-conversant with politics across the region. Why is our politics very toxic and to some extent detrimental?
I think the problem is that our leaders, they focus so much on leadership and offices than to look at the status of the economy or status of the wananchi. And this has made Kenya to look like every time we are in election mode. Leaders have also taken advantage of poverty. And as they appeal to the wananchi, they know they are weak. And therefore, wananchi also see leaders as a source of their handouts and income. And this makes our politics to be so intense and so toxic in the sense that politicians even start abusing each other in public because they feel that once you occupy that office, you are going to give goodies to your group or to your ethnic people.
And the president spoke about this where he was saying we should direct our politics in the way of development. We are crossing over to that bite very briefly, but we are now seeing a man towards the end of his leadership saying we've politics long enough. Maybe it's time we focus on development. Let's hear what the president had to say.
We must therefore use politics to shift the economy and indeed to address the plight of the most vulnerable members of our society. We need to use politics to better the livelihood of our fellow Kenyans. If we use politics as a means to a greater end, we will give politics meaning, and that is my intent for this year.
That is his intention this year, to give politics a greater meaning and ensure that politics translate into development. If politics translates into development, how will it look like?
I think everybody will be happy. We will have a life standard of living come up for the poor, for the people in Kenya. And I think he's emphasizing, he has said, is the 4 great agendas he has proposed. If they are implemented, they will assist and make our people better than what they have been. But with this politics, where we are focusing on who is going to take what in offices, I think we may not be able to concentrate in terms of delivering what he has already promised to deliver.
But how do we draw the line, Dr. Kenyoru?
Politics, there is good politics, there is bad politics.
We know bad politics. What does good politics look like?
Good politics is politics where you are delivering programs and projects which you promise the people to uplift their standard of living. But poor politics is just to have empty talk and have people to visit you or to come to you and give them handouts. And you are not concentrating on what you had promised to accomplish.
But that is another point, because we change leadership every 5 years.
Yes.
You promised to deliver this, and probably you started your project. 5 years later or 10 years later, somebody else comes into office. Whether that project was complete or not, somebody else comes in and they have their promise which they have to deliver. So we are left with very many white elephant projects.
I agree with you. That is what is happening in Kenyan politics. But Kibaki regime was very different. When he came to power, there were many projects, government projects, which were stalled. NYS buildings, which we normally see, Thika Road Highway, several government offices which were being built in the field, in the provinces, in the districts, were stalled. But when he came in, he didn't say these were Moi's projects, so I am not touching. He cleared all of them.
So politics should be about people and not the politician in the office.
Correct. It should be about people. Kibaki took that issue because he never said these are projects for the president. He said these are projects for the people. So he implemented all of them. And when Uhuru took over, if any, there might be very few which were not completed.
Okay.
But I think he took them off also from the implementation schedule. They were completed, and that's why he has brought his great 4 agenda, which he wants to implement and leave it as a legacy.
Well,
and that is why he has been insisting that please leave such kind of politics. Let's do politics for the people and for development.
Dr. Kenyoru, I don't mean to pour sand into the president's porridge, but he promised to deliver 500,000 housing units, 2 years to go, and he's only delivered 228 units. That's a story for another day. We'll pick it up another day. But 228, rather 500,000 minus 228, that's a big deficit. And he has a long way to go if he has to achieve any of this. However, I want us to bring the people into the conversation. And for a long time, ever since devolution came in, there has been tendering process, and small and medium enterprises have been doing business with county governments. You supply your goods, you supply your service with the hope that you can do business with the government, you can make some good profit at the end of the day and sustain your business. However, the big problem has become pending bills. And later on in the Voxes, you'll see a gentleman who said since 2016, others way to 2010, they did business with the county governments, the national governments, they've not been paid. But this is what the president had to say in terms of paying of pending bills. After his bite, we'll come back and listen to what Dr. Kenyoru has to say.
Paying bills is indeed a priority. And I'm pleased to note that following my directive in November of 2019, that all verified and genuine pending bills be paid immediately. About 70% of pending bills owed by national and county governments and have been deemed and verified as payable have been paid by the 31st of December.
Why aren't county and national governments paying pending bills to a level where national intervention or presidential intervention has to come in to push them to pay these bills?
Thank you. There are several reasons why this money has not been paid. One is corruption, which the president is intensifying to stamp out. Two, there is bureaucratic procedures in government. A very small payment can take several months because it has to go through a lot of processes for scrutiny. Three, there are delayed releases of funds from the exchequer and even from the national government to the counties. Which make this exercise of paying difficult. And I think it went so far that there is so much money which was not being paid. And therefore, many suppliers went out of business, and it caused alarm to the president, and he has to say something.
Yeah, but if devolution has to work, then county governments must partner with suppliers down at grassroots level. So how do we ensure that if I give or provide the county with a good or a service, I'm paid my money in due time, and that money will still be in circulation in the county for devolution to work? Counties need money, but people also need money, but also counties need goods and services.
Correct. But I think the problem, as I said, counties may want to pay, but if they have no money, what do?
How do they get their own money then?
I think the money they get as revenue collection cannot be enough at the county level. They have to depend on government, on national government funds transfers.
So what needs to be done at the national government level to ensure that suppliers are paid in due time? Because maybe even some government projects have stalled because suppliers can no longer afford to supply.
The Treasury should make sure that releases from exchequer is transmitted to the counties in time to avoid such delays. I remember even when I was in government, we could not be able to pay some things because the exchequer release has not been given.
Okay.
And this also is tied towards tax collection. If there is not enough money from the tax collection nationally, then there is no money to release to counties. So it is tied, it's a chain. So we have to have good collection, and this collection, once has reached Treasury, must be able to be released on time.
And staying with small and medium enterprises, we saw the revoking of the interest rate cap that had been introduced, and banks had shied away from lending to this sector because they termed them as high risk. And so when the interest rate was capped at 14% and it couldn't go over, banks kind of retreated from lending to SMEs and decided we're going to be lending to the national government. The national government had a field day, but SMEs were suffering. They're the biggest employer in the country. Their contribution to the GDP is really high. And the president had something to say about this, and he was urging the Central Bank of Kenya to try and ensure they keep the sector, the banking sector rather, in check now that the interest rates have been revoked. Let's listen in and then we'll get you to some.
Interest rate cap in November last year will facilitate the availability of more credit to businesses, which it will in turn increase the circulation of money. And at this point, I urge the Central Bank of Kenya to use the full range of instruments of regulation and policy at its disposal to prevent predatory lending and to ensure that banks can offer loans at affordable interest rates.
Revenue was previously the problem when the interest rate cap had been introduced. So we were saying we'll give you credit at an affordable price, but you can't access the credit. Now you can access the credit, but there's the fear that the exorbitant interest rates of about 25, 26, 20% might come back. How do we ensure that MSMEs can get accessible credit, but at an affordable rate?
The central bank, through its policy, as the president has said, they are able, and they will be able to regulate by issuing base rate, interest base rate for the banks. And the banks should be able to give loans within that base rate given by the central bank. I know Kenya, you can't compare it like UK, where interest rates are very low.
Yeah.
Here, interest rates, once we have brought in that central bank to regulate and to give base rates under which banks cannot go beyond, I think those will be considered as cheaper credit. Banks will have no leeway to bring in their own or their interest rates which are beyond. But they are free now to negotiate with the clients on the interest rate and agree as two parties. Yeah.
Okay, and now I want us to move on to the judiciary. This is a very key sector in the country, or rather institution. It's the institution that upholds justice.
Yes.
And the judiciary has come under a lot of fire, and particularly with corruption cases. We're saying the DPP is arresting people, the DCI is doing its investigations, but once the cases reach the judiciary, then there's a breakdown. It's either you're released on bail or the hearing will take 8 years. And the president quoted the Akasha brothers case that was being tried here. It couldn't be concluded. There wasn't sufficient evidence. They go to the United States of America. In a year's time, the brothers are convicted and they're beginning to do their jail term. But we cannot keep asking, why isn't the judiciary doing its job? The question rather should be, how do we empower the judiciary to fully dispense its duties?
Thank you. The judiciary, they require enough resources also to do their job. And enough resources means many things.
Okay.
Institutions, buildings, they require more judges to be employed so that we can have more judges per cases for the population. If we have very few judges and the cases are so many, and you know, Kenyans have learned their rights, and therefore we are having an increase of people going to court to seek redress. And if we don't have enough personnel, then you are going to have a backlog. We also need to invest as judiciary on technology. We should learn from the best practice internationally and see what we can put in place so that can be able to expedite the work of judges. unless we do that and change our old ways of doing things, we are going to have a lot of cases which are a backlog. You have talked of Akasha, which the president has also talked about. This was the time when there was a lot of very, very high corruption in the judiciary, when this case was done. Files could be delayed, evidence could not come up, and corruption could cut across, and therefore the case delayed and could not be finalized. I'm sure if this case was brought during Mutunga's time and Maraga's time, I don't think it could take such a long time. They may not have performed better like US, but they will be 60% better.
Okay.
So we have to look at corruption, we have to look at resources to this judiciary sector, and we have to look at how we can have credible evidence to convict people. Yeah.
And I like the fact that you've spoken about corruption. This is what the president had to say when it came to corruption and using the judiciary to convict those that are alleged to be in corruption scandals. Let's listen in.
And indeed, I direct our National Intelligence Service to undertake a rigorous review of all cartel groupings that have become leeches sucking away at the blood and sweat of hardworking Kenyans. And I want the review to pay particular attention to cartels operating in the public system of budgeting, procurement, regulation, and the illegal rigging of markets.
Exactly what the president is saying is that the biggest place where corruption is at is in the government institutions. How do we weed out corruption in these institutions?
You know, the government is the biggest spender of resources, of funds in the country.
Yes.
You can't compare it with public, private sector, because we have money and the government is using a lot of services. And the processes of resource allocation and resource spending must be transparent.
Okay.
And accountable. The president and the government he leads is to be very steady and focused on corruption cases.
But if nobody has gone to prison, the president was speaking about deterrence, that because we're seeing people getting arrested now, people are being afraid and they're fearing of the embarrassment and the public scrutiny. Is fear just enough, or we need a conviction? Because I understand during the Kibaki time, there was somebody that touched tax and was sent to prison. Why aren't we seeing a government official being tried and fully convicted to send a stern warning?
The problem in corruption cases is lack of proper and strong evidence. You have heard even the DPP say, even the Chief Justice saying that if we don't have evidence, it's not easy to convict. And mind you, the evidence sometimes, and in most cases, is given by officers from the government who are working with these corrupt people. So they may not be willing to convict their colleagues.
But if you are not willing to cooperate, then it means you're an accomplice.
Some have even gone to say, I want to be a government witness or a government, yeah, you have seen that. Some say, I will give evidence and I will against so and so. But what evidence do they give? Is not strong evidence to convict.
So if we cannot get convictions, how do we ensure that public resources are airtight and nobody can lay their hands on them?
I think the way the president has gone, I think I will also support it, because you are harassing these people. Some are fearing now to touch the money because somebody might be seeing. We must be able also to reward whistleblowers. You see, previously, you do whistleblowing, you are not kept secret, you are also exposed. And if you are exposed, you know your life is in danger. So many people are not willing to give their evidence. But I think the president must continue. Fear may not be the only way.
Okay.
Or fear may not stop people from...
But at least it's giving you a window to put your house in order.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, as we almost come to a close, I want us to talk about the cabinet reshuffle.
Yes.
And even with staying with corruption, we saw when Henry Rotich was arrested and he was being accused of being involving himself in a kind of, let's say, a corruption scandal with the dams in the Rift Valley, Kimorere and Aurora.
Yeah.
He stepped aside and he was replaced. So it's like the president is trying to send a message. And even in the speech, we saw a reshuffle. Now, I want to pick your thoughts on what you think about the allocation of government ministries and cabinet secretary positions. Before we came on, we were discussing about the Ministry of Education. Is it that some ministries are in chaos because they're not manned by the right people? And do you think this reshuffle will turn around key ministries such as agriculture, such as treasury?
The reshuffle normally is meant to bring in new thinking, new ideas, new way of doing things. And I think that's what the president is focusing. When you see the agriculture ministry, we have had so many problems and so many scandals, from the maize to locust to quite a number of things. And he has been watching. So once he did the reshuffle, it means he wants new thinking and energetic people who can focus on his agenda. The changes will not affect cabinet business in any way, except it will bring in energy, new energies, and new young blood.
However, are we picking the right people to man different cabinet positions? If it's agriculture, do we get an agriculture specialist? If it's health, do we get somebody who understands the health sector in and out so that they're manning the ministry from an inside-out perspective and not an outside-in perspective?
Not necessarily. We have seen where even experts who are expert in that ministry messing up. They don't even do better. But we have seen people who are not experts who have done very well in their ministries. So it's not necessary. It may work to some extent, but it's not necessary. And the political appointments, there are so many factors considered.
Okay.
And these factors may not be only that somebody who is educated or qualified in a certain field should be given a certain ministry which he qualifies in. No.
Very briefly, I want to pick your thoughts on what do you think are some of the key areas that the new entrants should do? Okay, Ukur Yatani has been in treasury for quite some time, and then Munya is now getting into agriculture. Let's start with agriculture as we wind up. What are some of the areas that he should give key priority to ensure that we turn the agricultural sector around? Yeah.
When I look at the reshuffle, in the first case, they need to support the president in corruption if they are going to manage issues in the ministry.
Okay.
2, for health, they need to look at these unnecessary strikes, see the best way they can resolve it. And normally it has been so because of managing doctors' cases and the payment.
Okay.
They should resolve the payment issue, whether it's in the county or in the national government. But health is already
devolved.
So they must work with counties to have it. Two, in agriculture, we need to improve our infrastructure, roads, all this, because our products should go to the market. And also we need to look at markets for our products. And these ministers, eventually they must look at processes. The government bureaucracy, it delays a lot of things. But you see, as I told you, since the government is a big spender and there are so many issues involved, they have to check. The bureaucracy is there to check every step we make in terms of services we are giving. But of late, I think ministries came up with service charters. And service charters say, within 3 days, we'll do this. Within 1 week, we'll do this. But I really don't think they are following those charters. Otherwise, we could be able to know which ministry is not performing. But I know normally, in most cases, we used to have a scorecard for ministries. The one did better and the one which did very poor. But I have not seen it of late. Yeah.
As we almost come to a close, this would be the final one, but we'll be coming back on Social Watch. We saw new, younger chief administrative officers coming into office. The president said they're 7 and they're under 30 years.
Yeah.
However, we also saw the re-entry of older politicians, Mutahi Kagwe, Lina Jebi Kilimo, back into the cabinet. What does this say? Because on one hand, you're saying we want to bring in young people into office, we want to bring in young blood, but again, we are seeing recycling of would-be political rejects.
I think you are very right. We are bringing old people back. But I wouldn't like to use the political reject.
They vied for election
they
and
vied,
they were not selected.
Of course, they vied and they were not voted in. The current process of appointing ministers, we also appoint people who are not politicians from the professional field. We are not sure also whether they are professional rejects.
Okay.
So, what I will add is that those who think that the old do not perform is a fallacy. The old have experience and they can focus. Equally, the young are ready to learn and adopt new innovation and technology quickly.
So we just need to find a way of ensuring both of them can work together.
Correct. This is a balancing act in the cabinet. We need, as you say, we need to see that they blend and they use their knowledge and wisdom and work together to push the agenda forward in any ministry.
Do you think that is possible in this day and age in this country?
It's possible because if you are working and you have no teamwork, you will go nowhere.
Yeah.
So teamwork must be there, understand each other, then you will move the ministry.
So our criterion for you putting into office all the politicians or politicians who vied and were not elected can still work as long as they focus on their duties.
Correct.
And we don't need a particular criteria of saying you have to be a technocrat or you have to have a basic understanding of this ministry before you come in.
In politics, no. I think it will be difficult for the president to get the person he may require from a particular region, a particular area. So he has to look at all factors.
Well, so much for the president saying we need to put politics aside, yet politics is part and parcel of every single bit of governance. Dr. Kenyoru, we have to take a break now, but when we come back, we'll be switching to Social Watch, where my voice goes off and your mic can tick, where my mic goes off and your voice comes on. We'll see you after the break.
Thank you.